Welcome to the latest episode of Fear Files. Tonight, we dive into a chilling tale of forbidden knowledge and supernatural terror. A paranormal investigator acquires an ancient journal from a notorious occultist's estate sale, setting off a chain of terrifying events. Brace yourself for a journey into the darkest realms of the paranormal. If you're ready, hit that subscribe button and let's begin.
Thomas Whitaker had always found solace in the written word. His small apartment in the heart of Northcliffe was cluttered with unfinished manuscripts, notes scribbled in the margins, and bookshelves that groaned under the weight of literary classics. Yet, despite his best efforts, his work had failed to capture the imagination of readers. The rejections piled up, each one a nail in the coffin of his dreams. Desperation drove Thomas to the outskirts of town one misty evening, where he stumbled upon the Inked Page. The bookstore was an imposing structure, its dark facade and narrow windows giving it an air of mystery and age. As he stepped inside, the scent of old paper and leather filled his nostrils. The dim lighting cast long shadows that danced across the room, and the creaking wooden floorboards echoed his every step. Thomas was drawn to a corner of the store, where a dusty, leather-bound tome sat alone on a shelf. Its cover was adorned with intricate symbols and an unsettling illustration of a quill dripping with black ink. He reached out, fingers trembling, and pulled the book from its resting place. The moment he touched it, a chill ran down his spine. "What is this?" he murmured, flipping through the brittle pages filled with text in an unknown language. "Ah, I see you found the Codex Noctis," a voice croaked from behind him. Thomas turned to see the bookstore owner, an old man with a hunched back and piercing blue eyes watching him intently. "Codex Noctis?" Thomas repeated. "Yes, an ancient manuscript said to contain the darkest secrets of the written word. It's not for sale," the owner said, but there was a hint of curiosity in his gaze. Thomas felt an inexplicable connection to the book. "I need it. I'll pay whatever you ask." The owner hesitated, then sighed. "Some doors are best left unopened, but if you're determined, consider yourself warned." Thomas paid the man and left the store, clutching the Codex Noctis tightly. That night, he began the arduous task of translating the text. The language was unlike anything he had ever seen, but he found himself understanding it intuitively, as if the words were whispering their secrets directly into his mind. Days turned into nights, and Thomas became increasingly obsessed with the manuscript. The lines between sleep and wakefulness blurred as he pored over the eerie texts. The more he translated, the more disturbing the content became. Tales of nightmarish creatures, shadowy figures, and a cursed ink that brought them to life filled the pages. It wasn't long before the horrors described in the Codex Noctis began to manifest in Thomas's surroundings. At first, they were subtle, a flicker of movement in the corner of his eye, whispers in the dead of night. But soon, they grew bolder. Dark figures lurked in the corners of his apartment, and monstrous forms appeared in his dreams, only to haunt him when he awoke. One particularly stormy night, Thomas woke to the sound of scratching at his window. He hesitated before pulling back the curtain, revealing a grotesque face with hollow eyes staring back at him. He screamed and stumbled back, heart racing. The figure vanished, leaving only a lingering sense of dread. Desperate for answers, Thomas confided in his friend Sarah, a local historian with a penchant for the supernatural. She was skeptical at first, but the terror in his eyes convinced her to help. Together, they researched the history of Northcliffe and the origins of the Codex Noctis. They discovered the town's dark past and the cult that had worshipped a deity of nightmares, using the cursed ink to summon their fears into reality. As the manifestations grew more dangerous, Thomas and Sarah realized they had to find a way to break the curse. The key lay in the Codex Noctis itself, a ritual that required the destruction of the manuscript and the quill that had penned it. But the ink was sentient, a malevolent force that fought back with every word they translated. One stormy night, as the walls of Thomas's apartment seemed to close in on them, they prepared for the ritual. The shadows writhed and twisted, forming grotesque shapes that lunged at them. Thomas's heart pounded as he recited the incantation, his voice trembling with fear. "Destroy the book, Thomas!" Sarah screamed, fending off a nightmarish figure with a silver dagger. With a final desperate effort, Thomas hurled the Codex Noctis into the fireplace. The flames roared to life, engulfing the manuscript. The ink screeched, a sound that pierced the very soul as it burned away. The shadows dissolved, and the room was flooded with an eerie calm. Breathing heavily, Thomas and Sarah watched as the last remnants of the Codex Noctis turned to ash. The nightmare was over, but the experience had left them scarred. Thomas knew he could never write again without fearing what his words might bring to life. As they stood in the quiet aftermath, Sarah placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Some stories are better left untold, Thomas." He nodded, staring into the dying embers. The line between fiction and reality had been irrevocably blurred, and he knew that his life would never be the same. Thomas tried to move on with his life, but the memories of that night haunted him. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind reminded him of the horrors he had unleashed. He had hoped to find solace in the familiar routine of his writing, but every time he picked up a pen, he felt a pang of fear. What if the nightmares returned? Days turned into weeks, and Thomas withdrew further into himself. He rarely left his apartment, afraid that the outside world would somehow trigger the return of the cursed ink. Sarah visited often, bringing food and offering words of comfort, but even she couldn't dispel the shadows that clung to his mind. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Northcliffe, Thomas heard a knock at his door. He hesitated, the familiar sense of dread creeping up his spine. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door to find a stranger standing there, a tall, gaunt man with sharp features and piercing eyes. "Thomas Whitaker?" the man asked, his voice smooth and cold. "Yes, who are you?" Thomas replied, wary. "My name is Elias Gray. I've heard about your predicament. I believe I can help." Thomas frowned. "Help? How?" Elias stepped inside, uninvited, and closed the door behind him. "I am a collector of rare and cursed artifacts. The Codex Noctis is one of my most sought-after pieces. I've studied its history extensively, and I know how to contain its power." Thomas's heart raced. "Contain? You mean there's a way to stop it for good?" Elias nodded. "The ritual you performed was only a temporary solution. The ink's essence remains, and it will seek out a new host eventually. But I have the means to trap it permanently." Thomas's hope flared, but he remained cautious. "What do you need from me?" Elias's eyes gleamed. "Your cooperation, and access to the place where the Codex Noctis was burned." Reluctantly, Thomas agreed. Together, they returned to his apartment, where the charred remains of the manuscript still lay in the fireplace. Elias examined the ashes, muttering to himself in a language Thomas couldn't understand. "We need to perform another ritual," Elias explained. "This one will bind the ink's essence and prevent it from ever manifesting again, but it will require a sacrifice." Thomas's blood ran cold. What kind of sacrifice? Elias looked at him, eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. "A piece of your soul. The ink is drawn to your creative energy. To trap it, you must give up that part of yourself." Thomas recoiled. "You mean I'll never be able to write again?" Elias nodded solemnly. "It's the only way." The weight of the decision pressed down on Thomas. His writing had always been his lifeline, his way of making sense of the world. But the thought of the ink returning, of the nightmares once again becoming reality, was too much to bear. "Do it," he whispered, his voice trembling. Elias began the ritual, chanting in the ancient language as he drew intricate symbols around the fireplace. Thomas felt a strange sensation, as if a part of him was being pulled away. The room grew cold, and the shadows seemed to twist and writhe. Finally, Elias completed the ritual, and the air grew still. The sense of dread that had plagued Thomas for weeks lifted, replaced by an empty numbness. He knew that a part of him was gone forever. "It is done," Elias said, his voice calm. "The ink is contained." Thomas sank to the floor, overwhelmed by a mixture of relief and loss. He had saved himself, and possibly the world, from the horrors of the cursed ink. But the cost was high. Elias placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've done a great service, Thomas. The ink will trouble you no more." With that, Elias left, leaving Thomas alone with his thoughts. He knew that his life would never be the same. The passion that had driven him to write was gone, leaving only a hollow shell. But as the days turned into weeks, Thomas began to find new ways to fill the void. He took up painting, channeling his creativity into a different medium. Though it wasn't the same as writing, it brought him a measure of peace. Northcliffe slowly returned to its eerie tranquility, the shadows no longer hiding unspeakable horrors. And Thomas, though forever changed, found a way to move forward, leaving the cursed ink and its nightmares behind. The story of the Codex Noctis became a whispered legend in Northcliffe, a cautionary tale of the dangers of obsession and the thin line between fiction and reality. And Thomas Whitaker, the man who had faced the darkness and survived, lived on, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Robert Glasper had always been drawn to the shadows of history, the secrets whispered between the lines of old manuscripts. His fascination led him to the secluded town of Northcliffe, a place shrouded in fog and mystery. The town's ancient library, with its Gothic spires and labyrinthine aisles, was a treasure trove of forgotten lore. It was here, deep within the bowels of the library, that Robert discovered the hidden archive. The archive was a narrow, dusty room filled with cobwebs and the scent of decay. As he explored its contents, a leather-bound diary caught his eye. Its cover was marked with strange symbols, and the pages were filled with cramped, spidery handwriting. The diary belonged to Abigail Thorne, a woman executed for witchcraft in the 17th century. Robert's heart raced with excitement. This was the kind of find that could make his career. Robert spent days poring over the diary, deciphering its cryptic text. The entries detailed Abigail's life, her knowledge of herbal remedies, and the rituals she performed. But as Robert delved deeper, the tone of the diary darkened. Abigail wrote of summoning vengeful spirits and malevolent entities, of rituals that bound these forces to her will. The words seemed to pulse with a life of their own, and Robert felt a chill as he read them. One night, as he sat by candlelight, absorbed in the diary, he heard a whisper. At first, he thought it was the wind, but the voice grew clearer, more insistent. "Release me!" Robert's heart pounded. He looked around, but the room was empty. Shaking off the unease, he continued reading. But the whispers persisted, growing louder with each passing night. Shadows danced at the edge of his vision, and he felt a cold presence watching him. Determined to understand what he had unearthed, Robert sought out Richard, a fellow historian with an interest in the supernatural. He invited him to his Victorian mansion, hoping he could provide some insight. "Do you know what you found, Robert?" Richard whispered, his eyes wide with dread. "It's just a diary," Robert replied, though his voice trembled. "A piece of history." Richard shook his head. "Some histories are better left buried. You're tampering with forces you don't understand." Robert brushed off his warnings, his curiosity too strong to heed caution. But as he continued his research, the hauntings intensified. He awoke to find strange symbols etched into his walls, his dreams plagued by visions of Abigail and the rituals she performed. The line between past and present blurred, and Robert felt himself slipping into madness. One night, the whispers guided him to the library's hidden archive. There, he found a secret compartment containing a small, ornate box. Inside was a lock of hair and a vial of dark liquid. The diary mentioned these items, tools used in the rituals to bind spirits. As he held them, a sense of dread washed over him. Robert's torment grew unbearable. The spirits he had awakened followed his every step, their malevolent presence a constant weight on his soul. Desperate, he returned to Richard, hoping he could help him perform a counter-ritual to banish the spirits. "We must destroy the diary and the items within the box," Richard said, his voice firm. "It's the only way to sever the connection." As they prepared for the ritual, the hauntings reached a fever pitch. Shadows twisted into grotesque shapes, and Abigail's spirit appeared, her eyes burning with vengeance. "You cannot undo what has been done!" Abigail screeched, her voice echoing with otherworldly fury. Robert's hands shook as he recited the incantation. The air grew thick with malevolent energy, and the room seemed to close in on them. With a final, desperate effort, Robert hurled the diary and the box into the fireplace. The flames roared to life, engulfing the items. The spirits screamed, a sound that pierced Robert's very soul. The room shook, and for a moment, it felt as if reality itself would unravel. Then, just as suddenly, the noise ceased. The air cleared, and an eerie calm settled over the house. Richard helped Robert to his feet. "It's over," he said, though his eyes betrayed lingering fear. Robert nodded, exhaustion and relief washing over him. But deep down, he knew that some scars would never heal. He had glimpsed into the abyss of history, and it had stared back. The forbidden diary had taken its toll, and Robert would never be the same. As the weeks turned into months, Robert tried to move on. He abandoned his research on Abigail Thorne, focusing instead on more mundane aspects of history. The hauntings ceased, but the memories lingered. He often wondered if the spirits truly rested or if they merely waited, biding their time. The town of Northcliffe returned to its eerie tranquility, its dark secrets once again buried beneath the surface. And Robert Glasper, the historian who had dared to unearth the past, lived on, forever haunted by the knowledge that some histories are better left forgotten. Robert Glasper's life, however, did not resume its previous rhythm. Each night brought a new torment, a new shade of Abigail's wrath. Though he had burned the diary and the accursed items, the echoes of the past refused to fade completely. He began experiencing vivid dreams where he wandered the fog-shrouded streets of 17th century Northcliffe, witnessing the horrors that Abigail had endured. During the day, he busied himself with routine academic work, but the nights were a different story. One particular evening, Robert sat in his study, leafing through unrelated documents, trying to distract himself. Suddenly, the temperature dropped and the candle flames flickered violently. He heard a faint, familiar whisper. "Release me." The voice was more urgent, more desperate than ever. Robert's heart pounded in his chest as he rose from his chair, the room seemingly closing in around him. The whispers grew louder, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to twist and writhe. He clutched his head, trying to shake off the oppressive presence. "Why won't you leave me alone?" he cried out, his voice echoing in the empty room. In response, a gust of cold wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candles. In the darkness, Robert saw a figure materialize. Abigail Thorne, her eyes burning with an unearthly light. Her voice was a chilling whisper, filled with sorrow and rage. "You cannot undo the past, Robert. You have awakened forces beyond your understanding." Robert stumbled back, his mind racing. He needed answers, and he realized that burning the diary and the items might not have been enough. There was something he was missing, something crucial that could end this nightmare once and for all. He decided to revisit the library, hoping to find any remaining clues in the hidden archive. Under the cover of night, Robert made his way to the library. The ancient building loomed ominously, its Gothic spire silhouetted against the moonlit sky. The air was thick with anticipation as he entered the musty corridors, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He navigated through the labyrinthine aisles until he reached the hidden archive. The room was just as he remembered, narrow, dusty, and filled with a sense of foreboding. He rummaged through the shelves, searching for anything that might have been overlooked. As he sifted through the relics, his hand brushed against a loose brick in the wall. With a gentle push, the brick shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, he found a bundle of letters yellowed with age. Robert carefully unfolded the letters, his eyes scanning the faded ink. The letters were written by Abigail Thorne, addressed to a confidant. They detailed her life, her accusations of witchcraft, and most importantly, the existence of a hidden ritual that could potentially break the bond between the living and the dead. His pulse quickened as he read the instructions. The ritual required specific elements: a piece of the accused's hair, the blood of the accused's descendant, and a talisman that had been in contact with the spirit. Robert realized he had two of the three elements: the lock of hair and the vial of dark liquid. The final piece, the blood of Abigail's descendant, posed the greatest challenge. Determined, Robert began researching Abigail's lineage, hoping to find any living relatives. His investigation led him to a small, decrepit house on the outskirts of Northcliffe, where an elderly woman named Margaret Thorne lived. She was the last living descendant of Abigail Thorne, and her family had long been shunned by the townsfolk, blamed for the town's misfortunes. Margaret was wary at first, but Robert's genuine desperation convinced her to listen. He explained the situation, showing her the diary and the letters. Margaret's eyes filled with a mix of fear and resignation as she agreed to help him. She pricked her finger, letting a drop of blood fall onto a handkerchief, completing the final element needed for the ritual. That night, Robert and Margaret gathered in the hidden archive, preparing for the ritual. The air was thick with tension as they placed the lock of hair, the vial of liquid, and the blood-stained handkerchief on the altar. Robert recited the incantation from the letters, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his heart. As the final words left his lips, a powerful gust of wind tore through the room, extinguishing the candles. Shadows danced wildly, and the temperature plummeted. Abigail's spirit appeared once more, her eyes filled with a strange mix of rage and sorrow. "Release me," she whispered, her voice a haunting echo. The items on the altar began to glow with an eerie light, and the room shook as if caught in an earthquake. Robert and Margaret held their breath, hoping the ritual would succeed. Abigail's form wavered, and with a final ear-piercing scream, she vanished. The room fell silent, and the oppressive presence lifted. Margaret slumped to the floor, exhausted, and Robert helped her to her feet. The nightmare seemed to be over, and for the first time in months, Robert felt a sense of peace. He thanked Margaret for her help and promised to ensure her family's name was cleared in the town's history. As the weeks passed, Robert resumed his life with a renewed sense of purpose. He documented the entire ordeal, writing a novel that blended history with his own harrowing experiences. The book, titled The Forbidden Diary, became a bestseller, captivating readers with its chilling tale of the past and the consequences of uncovering buried secrets. The town of Northcliffe, too, began to heal. The library saw an influx of visitors drawn by the stories of Abigail Thorne and the haunted past of the town. The dark history was no longer a source of fear, but a point of fascination, a testament to the resilience of those who dared to uncover the truth. Robert Glasper, The historian who had dared to unearth the past lived on, forever changed by the knowledge that some histories are better left forgotten, but some, when faced with courage and determination, can be understood and perhaps even laid to rest. Emma Collins had spent years studying the paranormal, driven by a personal tragedy that had left her yearning for answers. Her career as a paranormal investigator had taken her to some of the most haunted places in the world, but nothing prepared her for the estate sale of Malcolm Graves's mansion. The Victorian mansion stood on the outskirts of a small town, its once grand facade now cloaked in neglect. Overgrown vines crept up its walls, and the windows were dark, their glass cracked and dusty. The sale of the mansion's contents attracted curiosity seekers and collectors, but Emma was drawn by the mansion's dark reputation. Rumors spoke of Malcolm Graves, a notorious occultist whose experiments with the supernatural had led to unexplained phenomena. Among the items being sold were books, artifacts, and relics that had once belonged to Graves. Emma's attention was immediately drawn to an old leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with strange symbols that seemed to shift in the dim light. The journal was an enigma, a collection of cryptic writings and ancient spells that promised communication with the dead. Emma's heart raced with excitement as she acquired the journal, eager to explore its secrets. Little did she know that the journal was not merely a tool for communication, but a conduit for malevolent entities eager to cross over. Back at her modest apartment, Emma began to study the journal with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. She set up her investigation room with candles, a Ouija board, and various occult tools. The first seance she conducted was uneventful, with only faint whispers and fleeting shadows. However, as she continued to perform the rituals described in the journal, the atmosphere around her grew increasingly oppressive. One night, as Emma sat alone in her dimly lit study, she opened the journal to a new entry. The air was thick with tension, and the candles flickered in response to an unseen draft. She began chanting the incantations, her voice steady but her heart pounding. The room grew colder, and a dark presence seemed to press in from all sides. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted, and the shadows on the walls began to twist and writhe. Emma's breath became visible, and a chilling breeze swept through the room. She could hear faint, disembodied voices whispering from the corners of the room. Emma's pulse quickened as a spectral figure materialized before her, a gaunt man with hollow eyes and a twisted grin. "Who dares to disturb my work?" the figure rasped. Emma recognized him as Malcolm Graves, the notorious occultist whose journal she had discovered. Emma stumbled backward, her fear palpable. "I didn't mean to." "You have opened the gateway," Malcolm interrupted, his voice echoing with malice. "You have summoned me and others like me. Now, you will suffer the consequences." Emma's heart raced as she realized the gravity of her mistake. The journal was not just a means to communicate with the dead. It was a portal for malevolent spirits. Malcolm's anger was only the beginning. Other entities were eager to cross over and wreak havoc. Desperate for help, Emma reached out to Daniel Stone, a colleague who specialized in occult history. She showed him the journal and described the horrific encounters she had experienced. Daniel's face turned pale as he read the journal's entries. "This isn't just a diary," Daniel said, his voice trembling. "It's a portal. The rituals within it are designed to bridge the gap between the living and the dead, but they also invite dark entities." Emma's mind raced as she absorbed the implications. "What can we do? How do we close the portal?" "We need to perform a counter-ritual," Daniel explained, "but it's risky. We'll need specific items to reverse the spell and banish the entities." The counter-ritual required a rare combination of elements: a relic from Malcolm Graves's personal collection, a piece of the journal, and the blood of a willing participant. Emma and Daniel set out to gather the necessary components, but the malevolent entities grew more aggressive with each passing day. One evening, as they prepared for the ritual, the mansion was enveloped in an unnatural darkness. The temperature dropped sharply, and the walls seemed to groan with unseen forces. Emma and Daniel entered the study, their breaths visible in the freezing air. They set up the altar with the relic, the torn piece of the journal, and a vial of blood. As they recited the incantations from the counter-ritual, the room seemed to convulse with dark energy. Shadows danced wildly, and the air crackled with malevolent power. Malcolm's spirit appeared once more, his rage more intense than ever. "You cannot undo what has been done!" Malcolm roared, his voice filled with fury. "You have awakened forces that cannot be controlled!" Emma and Daniel pressed on, their voices trembling but resolute. The relic and the piece of the journal glowed with an eerie light, and the temperature surged. The malevolent entities screamed in agony as the energy built to a climax. With a final desperate invocation, Emma completed the counter-ritual. The room shook violently, and the dark entities writhed in torment. The oppressive presence began to dissipate, and the shadows receded. The intense cold lifted, and a profound silence fell over the mansion. Exhausted and shaken, Emma and Daniel collapsed to the floor. The journal lay in tatters, its dark power spent. The malevolent entities had been banished, and Malcolm's spirit was finally at rest. The mansion, too, seemed to exhale a sigh of relief as the oppressive atmosphere lifted. In the aftermath, Emma documented her harrowing experience, writing a detailed account of the investigation and the ritual that had saved them. The book, titled The Cursed Journal, became a bestseller, captivating readers with its chilling narrative. Emma's reputation as a paranormal investigator was solidified, and the mansion's dark history was revealed to the public. The town surrounding the mansion saw a resurgence of interest, with visitors drawn to the stories of Malcolm Graves and the haunted estate. Local legends turned into tourist attractions, and the mansion became a symbol of the dangers of tampering with forbidden knowledge. Despite the resolution of her ordeal, Emma continued her work with a new perspective. The encounter with the malevolent entities left her with a deeper understanding of the supernatural and a heightened respect for the mysteries she explored. She remained cautious, aware that some secrets were better left undiscovered. Emma Collins lived on, forever marked by her journey into the unknown and the chilling reminder that the veil between the living and the dead is thin and perilous. The mansion's dark legacy remained a haunting testament to the consequences of seeking to control forces beyond human comprehension.
And there you have it. The dark journey into the cursed journal has come to an end. We've ventured into the heart of the unknown and uncovered the terrifying truths that lie beyond. If tonight's exploration into the supernatural left you with chills, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. Your feedback helps us bring more spine-tingling tales to life. For more haunting stories and eerie investigations, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay curious and keep your lights on.